Hello, and welcome to the Global Business School's Cross-Border Coffee Break featuring the Case Center. I'm Stephanie Blockinger. I'm the program officer here at the Global Business School Network, and today I'm joined by Richard McCracken, director of the Case Center, who will be presenting on the case method and the impact of locally relevant cases. So here's the agenda today. I'll talk a little bit about the Global Business School Network, and then Richard will introduce the Case Center, talk a little bit about cases, how teaching cases are different from research cases, writing and teaching case studies, the impact of local cases, and then at the end there will be time for Q&A. So all participants are muted on the Zoom platform. If you have any question, click on the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. You can then type in your questions throughout the webinar. I will be able to see all of your questions and will moderate the Q&A time with Richard. If we run out of time, all unanswered questions will be shared on our website after the webinar. So first, a little bit about the Global Business School Network. Our mission is to improve access to locally relevant quality management education for the developing world. And we do this by fostering a network of more than 70 business schools across 40 countries, by supporting partnerships, promoting best practice through summits and annual conferences. And we also administer and manage capacity building programs that build the development of knowledge, skills, and tools necessary to teach management, education, and entrepreneurship effectively in local communities. So now I'll hand it over to Richard.
And thank you to the Global Business School Network for inviting me to be part of this coffee break series of webinars. I've joined in the atmosphere by having a coffee myself, so I'm going to enjoy that as we go through, and I hope you are too, wherever you are. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be part of this group, and thank you for joining me as we discuss and explore the potential for impact of teaching cases and giving expression to authentic local voices in business and management education around the world, wherever you may be. I'd like to begin by saying something about the Case Center. The Case Center is the independent home of the case method, and the reason that we say that is that we were created over 40 years ago by academics for academics. A group of UK and Irish business educators came together with their own experience of the impact of the case method and wanted to share it with others in the UK and Ireland. So they founded us with the mission of being part of the management education community and spreading the word about the qualities and the strengths of the case method in the UK and Ireland. Of course, like all good messages, you can't keep it a secret once you start talking about it. So news spread to the rest of Europe, and from Europe, we then moved to become a global organization. So we're a not-for-profit and registered charity. We have an exclusive an inclusive and diverse case collection which mirrors the makeup of our membership. And we have member schools in over 80 countries around the world. We run a program of writing and teaching workshops, and we also deliver other support and recognition programs for new faculty writing a case for the first time. We offer a scholarships program, and we also have a series of awards and competitions that recognize the work that's done by case teachers and by case writers in schools around the world. So it's a pleasure to talk. It's one of my favorite things to talk about case studies and the impact that they can have. I want to begin by exploring the link between research, which is something that we're used to working with and having recognized, and in many government jurisdictions around the world, it's research and the activity that we do there that is recognized in providing funding to schools and also results in recognition for individual faculty and their promotion. What I want to do today is to make the case for case studies as an impactful alternative output from research that's equally valid in the impact that it has both on teaching and in linking theory and practice. The case study life cycle, if we think about it, can be broken down so that research, whether that's field research or desk research, is conducted by a faculty member, and that research, once collated, can have a number of expressions. It could result in a research article or a paper being published in a peer-reviewed journal, but equally it could result in a teaching case study or a research case study. And we'll explore the difference between the two of those as we go on. So you've done your research, what next? Well, you write your case, and that, as I've said, is a valid output of that research and is increasingly recognized as a measure of impactful scholarship by accreditation agencies such as AACSB. Taking that case which you've written and teaching it in your own classroom has an amazing impact. For anyone seeing a case being taught in the hands of a skillful case teacher, the first time I saw that happen reminded me of a very famous statue, a kind of graphic statue in Manchester, which was created to mark a big athletics event there, and it looks a bit like an explosion. And the title of the statue is called "The Bee in Bang," and it's to represent the very moment when the starting gun goes off in an athletics race. And to me, the first time I saw a case being taught in the classroom, when the case took off and the discussion really caught fire, was exactly like that bee in bang. And that's the moment that we all as case practitioners look for. The impact of teaching one's own case in one's own classroom is enormous. It changes the way in which students view that teacher. It strengthens the link between your knowledge and them as learners, and it also creates and expresses links between you as an academic teacher and the practice that you have researched and the links within the business that you have made in the course of writing the case. You might also add to that by bringing in the protagonist around whom you've written the case as a guest, and have that person speak to the students live in your classroom. And I've seen that happen as well, and that too has enormous impact. On one occasion, the head of a low-price airline was in the wings waiting while the class discussed his actions as captured in the case, and the class were giving his actions a lot of criticism, very heavy criticism. And then the teacher stopped the discussion and said, well, let's just see what he would do. And that chief executive walked onto the platform live and had to face those students, having already critiqued his actions in theory without him being there. He had to face up to their long-term criticism for the rest of that discussion period. And of course, we can then and this is where our role also comes in at the Case Centre, we can distribute those cases and widen the impact beyond the classroom. And in what ways can the impact be wider than in the classroom? Well, from a school or from the faculty's point of view, it takes your brand, whether that's the school brand or the brand of you as a faculty member, it takes that into the world, and it has impacts in other schools around the world. And I think that can be evidence of the school's standing and the school's ability to influence education in other schools around the world. And that is recognized by bodies such as AACSB and EFMD, which are starting increasingly to recognize that cases can be used in support of accreditation under the heading of impactful scholarship. And we can provide the data that shows how many schools that your case has been taught at, and provide evidence of the school's impact on learning at those other schools. There's also impact in the protagonist companies themselves. Many companies that feature in a case use the case for the purposes of their own branding, because it takes the branding of the company out into the wider world and supports their own marketing efforts. But it's a very useful tool in recruitment, for example. They often use the case as an interview supplement. It can be used for internal training, and it can also be used in the induction of new recruits, immersing them in the culture of the company when they join. So I hope that you can see that, that there really is a lot of potential for impact at many levels. What I'm talking about in this short webinar is teaching cases. Cases that are designed to be taught in the classroom to deliver learning to students. Sometimes there's a confusion between teaching cases and research cases. So I thought it would be useful to draw upon some work that a colleague here at Cranfield, Professor Mark Jenkins, who you may know as the F1 prof, some work that he did in drafting this short distinction between research cases and teaching cases. And if we look across this chart, we can see that the teaching cases are written with an objective to achieve learning outcomes in the classroom and to contribute to a module of learning as it's delivered by the school. Research cases, on the other hand, have a different objection, which is to explore a research question. And the context affect that. So in the context of a teaching case, we're looking at using the case in a course or a module of instruction, whereas a research case is in a program of research. And there are other differences as well. Teaching cases, although often written or distributed in the form of electronic files, may be found in a variety of media. They may include video interviews, some multimedia elements, some samples of logos and so on. Some of them are recorded as audio cases, whereas research cases still are predominantly written and published in research papers, as journals, or in research-based books. Teaching cases themselves are mostly distributed through the case collections like our own, or in textbooks which make use of the cases at the end of chapters. So moving on to the next slide, just a little bit of before we leave them, what research cases are about and what value they have. They're very valuable methodology in building theory, in testing theory, or in demonstrating theory and mapping it against practice. So by moving on and leaving those, I'm not saying that research cases have no value. They are extremely valuable. It's just that our particular focus today is on teaching cases which are delivered and developed for use in the classroom. Now you may choose to teach, and certainly many people do choose to teach in the earliest period of their case teaching, with cases that you access through a collection such as the case centres. But I'd like today to take some time to talk about the value and the impact of writing your own teaching cases. So here are some of my thoughts on why it's a good idea to write your own teaching cases. The first is that the prime driver in all of writing around teaching cases is always your learning objectives that you feel your students need. Now, however close a match you find with someone else's case, you may find also that it doesn't quite fit. You know, it's the difference between finding the perfect shoe and a shoe that kind of fits, but not quite. And you might feel a little bit constrained, and you feel more comfortable in those old shoes that you've really worn in and feel comfortable in. And that, I think, is the benefit of writing your own teaching case. They really fit your style and the learning objectives that you want for your students. And those students can vary a lot from classroom to classroom. One thing I think that's often overlooked when talking about teaching cases is that one wants to stretch the students by talking about something that is within their experience, but which stretches them, which matches their potential and their ambition without being so far out of reach that they turn off by saying, there's no way I can ever be the chief executive or the owner of Apple. But they could be the chief executive or owner of a local coffee shop or a local business that is well known in your region. So as an expression of the business culture of local cultures or local businesses, of what is achievable and encouraging for your students to do, writing your own teaching case can't be beaten. It's an authentic voice for local business culture. Again, it boosts your impact in the classroom. I've seen students interact in a very different way with the teacher who has written the case that's being taught. You can bring the protagonist into the classroom, as I've said, to great effect. It also has a benefit of helping you to develop external contacts. I mentioned Professor Mark Jenkins earlier, and one of the things that he is very clear about is that having written his first case about Formula One racing, he then went back to write a second case and discovered that the contacts he'd made with the first one had deepened and strengthened. And so it was a real opportunity to go back in with evidence that he had used that access properly and was actually benefiting both his students and people within the companies. And that allowed him to get a deeper level of access when he returned to research the second case. So developing those external contacts is extremely useful. It also gives you opportunities for further research and for consulting. So many case writers find that as the case moves around and is taught in classrooms around the world, so too do consulting opportunities follow that pattern. You can also write your own teaching case and use it for examination and assessment. And that cuts away many of those problems that we find with essay mill answers and perhaps a wrong view of cases that there's a right answer. Some people feel that there's a right answer. Many students obsess about finding a right answer. And with cases that have previously been published, sometimes they can find, in quote, the right answer. If you've written the case yourself, then either you can avoid that because no one else has seen the case, or you can, if you do suspect that that kind of activity is going on, you can easily amend and tweak the case to be a step ahead of those who want to undermine the experience. And it also finally embeds your school in the regional business culture. One of the strengths of business education around the world, and which many business schools want to emphasize, is the benefit that they bring to business in their region. And this is a way of capturing that and giving evidence of it, as well as being of real value to the local businesses themselves. So all around, there are many reasons for writing your own business case. Now, having decided that you would like to write your own business case, and of course, I'm no different from every academic that I've met. I think I'm a fantastic writer. It's only when I come to try and write something that I've discovered that I might not be as good as I think I am. So here are some tips that I've picked up along the way from our own band of experienced workshop tutors, and from talking to prize-winning case writers as I present them with their Case Centre annual awards for writing cases. And these are common tips that come up time and time again from that group of people. These tips come out of hard-won experience, and there may be other variants around them, but these are the central ones. So first of all, a lot of what the case depends on for its success is in the nose of the case writer, a bit like a wine expert can smell a good wine and identify it by its aroma. Successful case teacher or case writers have a nose for a story. They can identify and develop a situation that looks like it will really capture some learning objectives that they want to deliver in their classroom. And they start with that possibility, that scent of an opportunity with a scenario, and build relationships with the people in the company, and then meld that with learning objectives. The learning objectives drive the case. They often start out with the learning objectives and then write the case in response to them, rather than writing the case and then looking at developing the learning objectives. So you have your learning objectives, an interesting scenario that has some element of ambiguity and conflict that needs to be resolved, and a protagonist, at least one protagonist, someone with whom the students can identify and whose viewpoint they can adopt when they're discussing the case. And then a decision. Now you need to know what the decision is, but actually don't include it in the case. The point of the case is that you leave that decision unresolved so that students have to come to a resolution in the classroom, driven or managed or supported by the tutor in the classroom. Now, if the tutor in the classroom is to do that properly, they really need the teaching note or the instructor's manual, which is sometimes called. We see that as an essential part of the case. The two are together. The instructor's manual is kept by the instructor, and basically what it does is it is the link between experience and theory and a guide for them in teaching the case in their classroom. And part of that is to share your experience as the case author in teaching the case in your classroom. So you share, typically students may go down this avenue or develop the discussion in this way, and here's a way of bringing it back onto track again. So having developed the teaching note and the teacher's manual, you have your case and the teaching note and the manual. What do you do then? Well, then you road test the case by teaching it in your own classroom. And my advice is that you ask a friend or a colleague. They should always be the same thing, but sometimes friends are not colleagues, sometimes colleagues are not friends. But ask someone who you trust and whose opinion you value to watch you teach the case and comment on it, get some feedback from the students perhaps, and then rewrite the case, not, I hope, in its entirety, but write it in the light of that experience, and you will come up with something that's very strong. So I mentioned the teaching note. We require that all the cases we distribute have a teaching note. That's a mark of how highly we value the teaching notes and what emphasis we place on them. They're often developed first and used to guide the writing, although some people prefer to write them after writing the case. We find that faculty actually prefer cases with teaching notes, and many faculty, when they're looking for a new case to teach in their own classroom, actually search on the teaching notes and evaluate the case on the strength of the teaching note rather than on the case itself. I recommend that you include a summary of the learning objectives, a summary of the scenario and the case and what it's about, and the lesson plan. Identify which student categories and levels that you are comfortable or you feel that the case is most comfortable in working with. That may be very broad. You may feel that it's a case that can work at all levels. You may feel that you've written it specifically with a more experienced group of students in mind or a less experienced students in mind. and share your own experience of teaching the case. Above all, this is to give the teacher an advantage in understanding what it is that the case is about, and how and your thinking in writing it. And teaching notes actually from local authors for use with or for local students, then the teaching note is a real benefit in both ways. In delivering to that local audience, it's a real benefit, but also with our experience in distributing cases is that often an international audience is more attracted to a case that's written about a real local issue. And this helps an international audience to understand the local context much better than they might otherwise. And that's for a range of reasons. Sometimes it's because the international audience wants to develop their students so they're able to work in international or multinational teams. And sometimes they use local cases in an international context because they find that it's a very good way of giving confidence to students who are perhaps at a school away from home and may feel a bit tentative about entering the discussion. If the case is actually about a brand or a product that they know about, that gives them an air or a hat of an expert, and that gives them confidence in entering the discussion as an expert within that discussion, even though they may be feeling a little bit tentative and a bit at sea, really, as they're studying in a different culture. So what kind of teaching cases might we think of? Well, we have, and these are just shorthand examples. Other people use different descriptors. There are situation cases, which is, why did something go wrong here? Here's the situation, it didn't quite work out. Why was that? Can you think your way through it and suggest a way that they could have avoided the disaster in that situation? There's an incident case, which is a bit shorter and illustrates a concept or an issue for discussion. Perhaps there isn't such a need for resolution in it. It's really to highlight a discussion topic. There's a background case which can impart information, and that's often used as a framework for other cases that are exploring specific issues. So you have a background case that you explore in some depth, and that stays with you as you move through the rest of the module and use other cases to explore specific issues, but against the background of that original background case that you looked at in detail. There are exercises cases, which is an opportunity for students to apply techniques, for example, of quantitative analysis. Some people write deliberately overly complex cases where the significant issues may be obscured by quantities of data. And there, the skill that the students develop is to understand through analysis which elements of the case are really relevant to the question they're being asked and which are obscuring it. And then the one that we mentioned earlier on, and which is perhaps the most common kind of case, which is a decision case, where students are required to state what they would do in the circumstances if they were the protagonist featured in the case. And then I've also listed mini cases. Now, mini cases, I think, are capable of being like any of these that I've mentioned. But many students, especially perhaps at executive education courses, or students at undergraduate level, some teachers feel that many students are looking for shorter and shorter cases because they've lost the ability to read, or they don't prepare before class. I'm not confident in that myself. I think that that's been going on since the Middle Ages. I think teachers have always complained about students not being what they used to be. And in fact, experience with executives is that they are just like their younger colleagues. They don't have time to read either. So there are many demands on students for many reasons, and many cases can be a useful way of introducing them to the case method. Now, I've talked a lot about the impact of cases in the classroom and the opportunity that it gives you as a teacher. What does it bring to the school? Well, I think that if you can have a school that really commits to not teaching 100% through cases, but with a significant contribution from cases as part of the educational offering at the school, it can build, I'm sure, a real sense of collegiality among case faculty. They often share ideas and support each other, look at cases being taught in the classroom, review and give feedback. So there's that collegiality. There are opportunities to use cases and case writing in support of accreditation bids by the school. Cases can help distribute the school brand, and they can enhance the school brand so that faculty who enter competitions for case writing can win, and that helps enhance the school brand. Awards such as our own, and there are others, also enhance the school brand. And finally, I've mentioned already, increased links with business in the region is not to be ignored. It strengthens that both in evidence of the impact that the school has had on businesses in the region, and also contributions from business coming back in. It may be in offering placements for students, it might be in sponsoring studentships, it may be in coming to talk to students in the school, and having speakers come to talk about experience. So all of those many routes for communication are opened and strengthened at case schools. And then there are some cases that are some features that we find feature more often with our most popular cases. This is a slide that I'm very happy to share, and I just want to talk you through it very quickly. The information is fairly self-evident, so I won't spend too much time on it, but there are some characteristics that stand out. In popular cases, big name companies tend to come up quite often. Some favored industries come up more often than others: airlines, food and drink, motor business, information technology and online retail, banking and hospitality. 93% of all the most popular cases have teaching notes. And the typical length of the most popular cases is somewhere between 6 and 20 pages. So not really, really short, but not long, not really long either. And it's interesting to note that although in research cases we talk more about the value of field research, in terms of writing a teaching case, the popularity is pretty evenly balanced between field research cases and cases that are built on desk research. So there are just some interesting features about it that you may find useful or interesting in looking at our more popular cases. And then finally, before we open up for discussion, here are some resources that are on our website. They're freely available, and they're very rich actually. So we have a whole raft of resources that are available, but these are the most useful hot links to take you directly to those resource pages around case writing. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to Stephanie now for the question and answer session, and I hope that stimulated plenty of questions, and look forward to hearing what you think.
Great, thank you, Richard, for highlighting how locally relevant cases impact students, the faculty, institutions, and the industries themselves. I think we all agree that case method is fundamental to business and management education. So thank you for highlighting that impact. We have a question. Please feel free to submit your questions now. In the categories of cases, would you say that some of these case types overlap?
Yes, I think they do. I pulled the categories apart somewhat just to make the definitions a bit clearer, but actually you can find several of those categories within the same case, I think. Yeah, they do overlap.
Are you aware of any cases that are done more on an industry level rather than the company level?
Yes, they tend not to be cases so much because at an industry level, it's difficult to find a protagonist really that represents the industry. But there are background notes on an industry which give a kind of overall coverage of what's current in that industry. What are most companies within that industry struggling with? So you might look at, let's say, the newspaper business at the moment. You might say that newspapers around the world are struggling with the impact of online and the move away from people buying a physical newspaper to expecting free access to information and resources. And that's something that would be covered in a background note rather than in a case at an industry level. But at the level of an individual newspaper, then I could imagine a case being written with exactly that. So the background note would be the thing that goes first to the students, and then the case follows that.
How are policy cases different than business cases?
I'm not sure that they are different. I think we carry quite a few collections that look at issues of policy. So there are collections looking at government policy and governance. Some cases looking at policies around the delivery of healthcare and so on. And I think that, I guess the main difference is not an emphasis on profitability, but that looking at not-for-profit activities or governance activities, the cases still have a focus on business-like behavior and analysis and communication and working as teams. It's just that the output is different, but I don't think the nature of the discussion or the nature of the case is really affected by that.
Could you please clarify the relationship between teaching cases and accreditation?
Yes. We've been talking for some time with AACSB and EFMD, and both rubrics for accreditation have a room for schools to submit writing cases as evidence of that meet those standards. In the AACSB accreditation rubric, that follows two things. One is AACSB measures and accredits your ability to be the kind of school that you say you want to be. So they don't want to impose their definition of what makes a good business school. Their definition is, if you want to be an international school or a local school or a teaching school or a research school or whatever, then what they ask you to do is provide evidence that you are really good at being that type of school. And they look at faculty and categorize faculty from, maybe a research faculty, or maybe someone who teaches and not just teaches but writes teaching cases. And the faculty member who does that could be described in AACSB's terms as that could be evidence of impactful scholarship, that you may be a practitioner, perhaps someone coming in from industry. You are now an academic, but you are taking your industry experience and you are teaching with it. And your teaching, as captured in the teaching case, as it's used in other schools, that teaching case is evidence of impactful scholarship. And we are very happy to provide data which will say this case has been taught in X number of schools in X number of countries, and it has reached this number of students. And we have experience of some schools using that in support of their accreditation bids.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever find that cases that are submitted to you are not cited or referenced correctly? If so, what are the most common mistakes people make?
I'm just thinking, do you mean cited correctly by?
I'm assuming by the person writing it.
I think just typically the mistakes are those that you would find of any academic work. I don't think there's anything that. I find that a difficult question to answer because I think nothing sticks out as being unusual about cases as compared to other forms of academic writing.
We have time for a couple more questions. How long should a teaching note be in regard to the case study, and how long is a mini case?
Oh, a mini case, let me start with that. A mini case, our definition is a case that's under, let's say, 5 pages. Some people have a definition that's even shorter, and they may say a couple of pages. How long should the teaching note be? I think that's very difficult. I think, strangely enough, the shorter the case in my experience, the longer the teaching note. It seems to need more support and more ideas from the teacher if the case itself is very short. Typically, I guess about 5 pages. I'd say a minimum of 3. It typically feels around 5, maybe 6 pages. But some people are longer and do much more detailed teaching notes. And then we get a different response. Some teachers find that very useful. Some people think, no, I just want to have some support, but not control. You know, I don't want to feel that I'm controlled by the teaching note. I want to have enough evidence there to help me fly as a teacher, but not so much detail that I actually feel bogged down or restricted by.
Okay, I'll take one more question. And just a reminder that for the questions that we haven't answered, we will make all questions available on our website. Okay, so the final question, how do you deal with situations where you are using primary data to write the case, then the protagonist reneges on sharing their data?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and it's actually, as soon as you asked the question, I realized that it's something I forgot to mention in my presentation, so thank you very much for asking it. It's an essential part of the relationship building between the case writer and the protagonist is to develop that bond of trust so that they trust you in how you're going to treat their information, and that you're clear up front that actually, yes, I'm trustworthy, but I'm also an independent academic. I have the right, and actually it would be bad of me not to express my views accurately and to write a truthful case about your business. So they need to know that from the beginning. And then it's a real skill to maintain that relationship. And that often it works really well between the protagonist and the case writer. The difficulty then comes when final sign-off is required, and you must get sign-off from the company. It's the company you get sign-off from, not the protagonist. Often, even if the protagonist is the chief executive, sign-off is required from the legal department of the company. And those people in the legal department are outside the process of the case having been written. So often they have standard forms of tightly governed non-disclosure agreements and so on that they are used to working with, and they find the case very difficult. So really that can involve a lot of hard work. But actually it's just needed. You just got to keep working on it and not see it as an add-on, but see it as something that's absolutely core to the skills that are required in writing the case, is the ability to manage that relationship. It also comes back to this, the choice of the scenario and the choice of the company that you're working with. So if you think, well, I'm going to approach Apple and they won't sign off on anything because you know, I'm an ordinary first-time case writer at a fairly small school. I've got no contact with Apple. Well, that you are really giving yourself an almost impossible task. What I would do in a situation like that is, of the contacts I already have, the people I already have some relationships with, which one of those has mentioned a scenario? And it may be the local coffee shop, it might be a local auto repair shop, it might be a local solicitors or a shopping center. Those kind of people are really valuable, and I would say start off with some, you know, the general advice for novelists is write what you know about, and I'd say the same about writing a case. Write what you know about with people that you're already have already developed some relationship with.
Great, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us today. We will be sending a follow-up email with additional information and resources. And I noticed there were a couple of questions around case center workshops and also grant opportunities. So we'll try to include those in our follow-up response. But I wanted to highlight that our next cross-border coffee break will be held this Thursday, October 25th, with Dr. Mumtaz from IBA Karachi, who will be talking about their innovation and entrepreneurship online exhibition. We hope you will be able to join us for that webinar. And thank you again, Richard, for your insight into the case method. And I hope everyone has a great day.